Geography and the Lost Boys of Sudan. In the novel, They Pour Fire on Us from the Sky. Conflict Project by Anvith Reddy. The Sudanese climate and terrain. In Sudan, there's a semi-arid climate. They're in the northern hemisphere, above the equator. And it is a semi-desert savanna, and I got this from the Climate Geography of Sudan. They have a tropical climate with it gets very hot in the day and then cold at night. And there's two major seasons, the wet and the dry season. It's mostly flatland with shrubs and a few mountain ranges. In the book, it is described as vast green grasses with trees dotted everywhere. Villages were hid in the dense forest. This is during the wet season, the rainforest, and then when the waters of the Nile went back, the mud became dry and cracked pieces of earth. This is the dry season. This is also on page 13. This is the route taken by Benson and Aleppo, but these are also many of the camps that the other Lost Boys stopped in, and a couple of them are Bor, Amadi, Juba, Shambi, Machdang, and etc. The boys their journey is considered a diaspora, spreading out through Sudan. And first, the boys, they started in Sudan. They traveled up the border to Ethiopia. And then after the government was overthrown in 1991, they migrated back down through the coast of Sudan, and they finally arrived in Kenya. Some of the major camps mentioned in the book are Natinga, Kakuma, and Bor. There are many dangers to survival along the route in the book and in real life. A major concern was malnourishment because not much food was available, and many of the boys died from dehydration and lack of food. There's also many diseases, and they're interacting with many other villages and cultures, so the diseases were spread easily, and lice was common. And malaria was also very common because it was a hot climate. From the book on page 17, it says, kids got malaria a lot, and sometimes meningitis or other diseases. And then also, it says, once I was sick because I ran in the sun too much and got malaria. This is from the mosquitoes, and they spread easily. There's also many enemy soldiers along the way, so they have to watch out for them. And there's other animals that might harm them because they're boys. Some are large predators and small predators. Large predators, examples are on page 30, elephants, buffaloes, and lions. And those are the dangerous ones. And there's also hippopotamus and alligator. Like they said in the book, the hippos had large white teeth on the river. And then there's also the herbivores that aren't that dangerous, the antelope, giraffe, and gazelle. And then there's also smaller predators such as snakes. In the book on page 69 it says, when we had to cross a large swampy area, many people were bitten by snakes. That's dangerous because they didn't have much medicine back then. And then there's also many culture divides. So if they came with a tribe that they didn't like, and there's the fight, an example is on the Gilo River when there was a massacre. And agriculture in Sudan is a major part of the country's economy, 80%, and most of the water that's taken in from the dams is pushed into the irrigation system for the fields, and that's from the Sudan agriculture. And then Sudan grows a large variety of crops during different seasons, and they grow many staple and cereal crops such as sorghum, wheat, rice, barley, etc. And then they're grown in two seasons. And the livestock, they have goats, cattle, and it's usually nomadic, but during the war it was kind of split up. And cattle in the book was their main source of trade. And the boys say, we harvested in the autumn and planted at the end of summer. This describes the seasons. And then he plowed many hectares of land, growing fruits, vegetables, and grains, showing the variety of crops that they grew. America versus Sudan. There's many differences, and you can compare and contrast them. How do climate and terrain affect the way people live? Climate and terrain really affect us because that's how we build our houses and how we do our daily things. The housing differences. In Sudan, houses is usually mud, sticks, and thatched roofs, and this is to keep the heat out, and the ground is very loose, so you can't build upward, and they can't use fancy materials like we have here. So the building materials, they use what's around them, and they can't afford like bricks and concrete. And the agriculture in Sudan, they keep their livestock with them, and the agriculture is outside because much of their income is agriculture. And they don't have much space either because the villages are compact and the tribes tend to stay close to each other and clustered. And the terrain, there's not much space. And the energy resources. In Sudan, it's mostly petroleum, but they have potential for wind power and solar power, but they do not have the technology. And a quote is, "Small muddled huts thatched with grasses," from the book. Current events in Sudan. In Sudan today, there's many environmental aftermaths that have occurred from all the gunfire and bombs, and much of the environment has been destroyed, including agriculture. Deserted and burned areas. Many of the villages were burned, and a lot of the tradition that was there was destroyed. And so culture is lost. And then also the fields were left, so the agriculture has dropped. And because Sudan has such a dry climate, there's a tendency for forest fires, and then the gunfire and bombs provoke that even more. And that's from the Sudan aftermath. And then agriculture. There's no more farmers because they either got killed or they fled, and the livestock is being eaten and Britannica. That's where I got it from. And here's a few quotes. "The ground smelled of burning oil, and that could smell of oil and ammunition. The next morning I woke up to destroyed buildings, bullets, shells, bones, and skulls lying everywhere." This shows the mass destruction that occurred, and about 2 million people died in this war. And then it also says every tree in Ethiopia has been poisoned by the bombs from the big war, and this shows that they're not going to regain much of the flexibility they had before. And the water system has been destroyed. This is catastrophic for them because 40% of their gross domestic product is from agriculture, and without irrigation, not much of that could happen. And this relates back to the cattle and sheep and goats, and it shows how the goats were killed, they got hunted, or they ran off. So more current effects in Sudan. So because many of the boys were relocated and put into different countries, the other countries, not all might be able to handle them because they don't have enough resources. Most of these countries around them are still poor, and they have struggling in governments. So there's a large strain on the economy of the country, and from the book it says, "For the first 8 months in Penudo refugee camp, we faced a lot of difficulties, and we had no food, no shelter, and no one to depend on. There's also not much education, so there's not much to do. But if the UN or other countries came and they funded these places, they would be a lot better, and without the funding, there's not much that can happen, and these camps will not be successful." There's also a culture shift because these people from all over Africa, so they might get into conflicts, or it's just a lot to accumulate. And then there's also culture differences from the book. And so there might be a fight, once again, on the Gilo River, and stuff like that. This is my works cited in alphabetical order, and then continued. Thank you.